Chocolate looks simple when it is sitting on a shelf. A dark square, a pale bar, a glossy truffle, or a steaming cup may seem like minor variations of the same ingredient. Yet each one represents a different answer to the same question. What can happen when cacao is fermented, dried, roasted, ground, sweetened, blended, heated, cooled, or sometimes barely processed at all? Change the proportion of cacao, remove the milk, caramelize the sugar, preserve the crystals, choose beans from one isolated region, or add ground hazelnuts, and the result can become an entirely different experience. Some chocolates snap cleanly, others melt almost immediately. Some taste bitter, floral, smoky, fruity, nutty, milky, sour, or caramelized. To understand why, it helps to begin with the variety that places cacao most clearly at the center. Dark chocolate is the closest major modern style to the fundamental partnership between cacao and sugar. Its main chocolate ingredients are cocoa solids and cocoa butter, usually combined with sugar and sometimes a small amount of vanilla or an emulsifier. Unlike milk chocolate, it does not depend on milk solids for softness or sweetness. This allows the natural character of the cacao to remain more exposed. The percentage printed on a dark chocolate wrapper refers to the total amount of the bar that comes from cacao ingredients. That total can include both the non-fat cocoa particles that carry much of the flavor and the cocoa butter that creates smoothness. A 70% bar is therefore not necessarily 70% bitter cocoa powder. It may contain a carefully balanced mixture of cocoa mass and additional cocoa butter, with sugar making up much of the remainder. A higher percentage usually means less room for sugar, but it does not automatically guarantee better chocolate. An intensely bitter bar made from poorly fermented or badly roasted beans may be less enjoyable than a lower percentage bar produced with greater care. The quality of the cacao, the roast, the refining process, and the balance of acidity and bitterness matter as much as the number on the package. Dark chocolate can reveal flavors that surprise people who expect cacao to taste only like chocolate. Depending on the beans and processing, it may suggest berries, dried fruit, flowers, tobacco, nuts, wood, coffee, citrus, earth, or warm spices. These flavors are not necessarily added. Many develop naturally through the genetics of the cacao, the environment in which it grew, fermentation after harvest, and decisions made by the chocolate maker. Texture also separates fine dark chocolate from a rough mixture of ground cacao and sugar. One of the most important developments in modern chocolate was conching, a prolonged mixing and aerating process associated with Swiss chocolate maker Rodolphe Lindt in the late 19th century. Before techniques like this became common, chocolate could feel coarse and uneven. Extended mixing helped reduce harsh aromas, distribute cocoa butter more evenly, and create the smoother sensation now expected from a well-made bar. Milk chocolate takes the same cacao foundation and changes its personality by adding milk. The idea sounds obvious today, but creating a stable milk chocolate was once a difficult technical challenge. Fresh milk contains water, and water causes melted chocolate to seize into a thick, grainy mass. It can also shorten shelf life. 19th century makers needed a form of milk that could be blended into chocolate without destroying its texture. Swiss chocolatier Daniel Peter worked for years on the problem, and eventually used concentrated milk associated with Henri Nestlé's advances in preserved milk products. By the 1870s, the partnership between cacao, sugar, and processed milk had produced a practical form of solid milk chocolate. The new style was sweeter, softer, and less bitter than the darker chocolates that came before it. Milk solids contribute more than a creamy taste. Milk fat changes how chocolate melts, while milk proteins and milk sugar soften cacao's sharper edges. The result often has notes of caramel, cooked dairy, malt, or vanilla. Because milk chocolate generally contains less cocoa mass than dark chocolate, the origin character of the beans may be less obvious, but careful makers can still preserve distinctive cacao flavors. Regional traditions have also shaped milk chocolate. Swiss examples became known for smoothness and a rich dairy character. British styles often developed their own balance of milk and sweetness. Many American milk chocolates gained a slightly tangy flavor, linked to the way milk was historically treated during production. What began partly as a preservation solution became a familiar national taste. People raised with that flavor may associate it with chocolate itself, while someone accustomed to a different tradition may notice the tang immediately. White chocolate moves even farther away from the dark color of cacao, but it still contains one of the cacao bean's essential components, cocoa butter. When cacao beans are processed, they produce cocoa solids and cocoa butter. Dark and milk chocolate contain both. White chocolate removes the dark cocoa particles and keeps the pale fat, combining it with sugar and milk ingredients. This is why white chocolate can legitimately be connected to cacao even though it has no brown cocoa solids. Its identity depends heavily on the quality of its cocoa butter. Natural cocoa butter can carry a delicate chocolate aroma, while highly deodorized versions may taste much more neutral. In either case, white chocolate is usually dominated by sweetness, dairy notes, and vanilla. Its melting behavior is one of its most appealing qualities and one of its greatest difficulties. Cocoa butter softens rapidly near body temperature, giving white chocolate a smooth, cooling melt. But the mixture can scorch easily, become overly thick, or separate if handled carelessly. Pastry chefs must control temperature precisely when melting, tempering, or coloring it. Because white chocolate has a mild flavor, it is often treated as a base for stronger ingredients. Matcha, coffee, citrus, berries, nuts, spices, and floral flavors can stand out clearly against it. This makes white chocolate less of an empty imitation of dark chocolate and more of a flexible medium with its own purpose. Ruby chocolate introduced a much newer color to the familiar dark, milk, and white group. Publicly presented in 2017 by Barry Callebaut after years of research, ruby chocolate has a naturally pink appearance and a noticeably tart, fruit-like taste. Its color does not depend on simply mixing ordinary white chocolate with berry flavoring and red dye. Ruby chocolate is produced through the selection and specialized processing of cacao materials that retain compounds capable of creating the pink tone and fresh acidity. The exact industrial method is proprietary, but the important difference lies in controlling how the cacao is treated. Fermentation, acidity, temperature, and other processing choices can dramatically alter the color and flavor compounds inside cacao. The result often tastes less like a traditional dark bar and more like a meeting point between chocolate, yogurt-like acidity, and red fruit. Some people notice raspberry or citrus impressions, while others find it mildly sour. Its unusual character makes it useful in desserts where visual color and acidity are as important as sweetness. Ruby chocolate also demonstrates that chocolate categories are not determined only by the species of tree or the country of origin. Processing can unlock or preserve qualities that conventional methods might reduce or transform. A brown roasted flavor is not the only possible expression of cacao. Blonde chocolate offers another example of processing creating a new identity, although its origin is associated with an accident rather than a planned scientific launch. French pastry chef Frédéric Bao is widely credited with discovering the style after white chocolate was left warming for far longer than intended. Instead of becoming useless, it slowly changed color and developed a toasted aroma. Prolonged, gentle heating transforms the milk and sugar components. Reactions similar to those responsible for browned butter, toasted bread, and caramelized dairy create deeper flavors. The pale ivory color becomes golden or biscuit-colored, while the taste begins to suggest shortbread, caramel, condensed milk, toffee, or toasted cereal. Valrhona later commercialized this style as dulce, helping establish blonde chocolate as a category rather than a kitchen mistake. It still has the cocoa butter, milk, and sugar foundation of white chocolate, but the heating process gives it a depth that ordinary white chocolate does not possess. The distinction between blonde chocolate and caramel-flavored white chocolate is important. Added caramel can provide sweetness and color, but true blonde chocolate develops much of its character by browning the ingredients already present. Time and temperature become flavoring tools. Modica chocolate travels in the opposite direction. Instead of using modern refining to produce perfect smoothness, it preserves a deliberately rough, crystalline texture. It comes from the Sicilian town of Modica, where a chocolate-making tradition developed under Spanish influence. The method is commonly connected to techniques the Spanish encountered in the cacao cultures of the Americas. Modern industrial chocolate is refined until the solid particles become too small for the tongue to detect easily. Modica chocolate avoids that degree of refinement. The cacao mixture is worked at relatively low temperatures, and the sugar does not fully dissolve. When the chocolate cools, the crystals remain inside the bar. The first bite can therefore be surprising. Rather than melting into complete silkiness, it breaks with a dry, crumbly snap and releases tiny grains of sugar. The texture is not a manufacturing defect. It is the central feature of the style. Traditional additions, such as cinnamon, vanilla, coffee, citrus, or chili, may be mixed directly into the chocolate. Because the process is simple and the texture remains rustic, the flavors can feel immediate and concentrated. Modica chocolate reminds us that smoothness is a cultural preference, not an absolute measure of quality. For much of cacao's history, chocolate was coarse, foamy, spiced, and very different from the polished bars now considered standard. Single-origin chocolate is defined less by texture or ingredients than by geography. Most mass-market chocolate blends cacao from several farms, regions, or countries. Blending helps manufacturers create a consistent flavor even when individual harvests change. A single origin bar narrows the source, sometimes to one country, one region, one cooperative, or even one estate. The purpose is to make place more noticeable. Cacao is an agricultural product, and its flavor is influenced by plant genetics, rainfall, soil, surrounding vegetation, harvest ripeness, fermentation, drying, and storage. Beans from Madagascar are often associated with bright fruit and acidity. Some Ecuadorian cacao is known for floral or nutty qualities. Other regions may produce deep, earthy, woody, spicy, or dried fruit notes. The comparison with wine and specialty coffee is useful. Grapes grown in different locations do not taste identical in coffee. Beans from different farms can have strikingly different profiles. Cacao behaves in a similar way. Chocolate makers who focus on origin try to preserve those distinctions instead of blending them away. This does not mean every bar from one country tastes the same. A country may contain multiple climates, cacao varieties, and fermentation traditions. Even neighboring farms can produce different results. The single origin label is therefore a starting point rather than a guarantee. It tells the buyer that traceability and regional character are part of the intention. Gianduja shows what happens when chocolate is transformed by necessity and local agriculture. The style emerged in turn in the early 19th century when political conflict and trade restrictions made cacao more expensive and difficult to obtain. Piedmont, however, had excellent hazelnuts. Chocolate makers combined ground hazelnuts with cacao and sugar, stretching the limited chocolate while creating something richer and softer. The hazelnuts do not sit inside Gianduja as crunchy pieces. They are roasted and ground into a fine paste, releasing their natural oils. When blended with chocolate, the paste produces a smooth texture that melts quickly and can feel almost creamy even without large amounts of dairy. Good Gianduja balances both ingredients. Too much sugar can hide the nuts, while low-quality hazelnuts can make the mixture taste flat or oily. Piedmont hazelnuts are especially valued for their aroma, sweetness, and relatively delicate bitterness. Gianduja later influenced a wide family of chocolate hazelnut products, including soft fillings, pralines, solid bars, and spreads. Nutella belongs to this broader historical lineage, although its formula and purpose differ from traditional Gianduja. What began as an answer to cacao scarcity became one of the most enduring flavor combinations in confectionery. Raw chocolate is shaped by the desire to reduce heat during production. Conventional chocolate making normally includes roasting, which develops familiar chocolate aromas, lowers moisture, and helps reduce microbial risks. Raw chocolate makers avoid high roasting temperatures and usually try to keep processing below a chosen limit. There is no single worldwide definition of raw chocolate, and the label can be complicated. Cacao beans are normally fermented after harvest, and fermentation naturally produces heat. Drying conditions can also vary. A product described as raw may therefore mean that the beans were unroasted, lightly treated, or processed below a temperature standard chosen by the manufacturer. Unroasted cacao often tastes more acidic, bitter, vegetal, or astringent than conventionally roasted chocolate. Roasting drives chemical changes that create many of the nutty, warm, and deeply chocolate-like flavors people recognize. Without that stage, brighter and harsher notes may remain. Texture can also be different. Lower temperature processing may make grinding and refining more challenging, depending on the equipment and recipe. Some raw bars are smooth, but others retain a slightly coarse or dense quality. Sweeteners, such as coconut sugar, dates, or alternative syrups, are sometimes used, especially when raw chocolate overlaps with vegan or whole food traditions. Claims about raw chocolate preserving more enzymes or providing dramatic health advantages should be treated carefully. Cacao naturally contains minerals and plant compounds, but processing, serving size, sugar content, and the rest of a person's diet all matter. Raw chocolate is best understood as a processing philosophy and a distinctive flavor style, not a guaranteed medical product. Drinking chocolate brings the story back to cacao's earliest forms. Long before the solid bar became ordinary, cacao was prepared as a beverage in Mesoamerican cultures. These drinks were not identical to modern sweet hot chocolate. They could be bitter, spiced, thickened, poured to create foam, and consumed in ceremonial, social, or elite settings. When cacao reached Europe through Spanish colonial networks, the beverage changed. Sugar softened its bitterness. It was served hot, flavored with ingredients such as vanilla or cinnamon, and became an expensive luxury associated with wealthy households and fashionable chocolate rooms. Drinking chocolate is often confused with hot cocoa, but they are not always the same. Hot cocoa is commonly made from cocoa powder, sugar, and milk or water. Drinking chocolate is usually made by melting actual chocolate into liquid. Because the chocolate contributes cocoa butter as well as cocoa solids, the drink can become much richer and thicker. Regional versions developed their own identities. Spanish chocolate is traditionally thick enough to coat a churro. Italian chocolate calda can approach the consistency of warm pudding. French chocolate chaud is rich and intense, while Viennese traditions may add whipped cream for contrast. The same cacao that forms a crisp bar can become something slow, dense, and almost spoonable. Seen together, these varieties reveal that chocolate is not one food, but a family of techniques. Dark chocolate highlights cacao concentration. Milk chocolate uses dairy to soften and sweeten it. White chocolate isolates cocoa butter. Ruby chocolate preserves color and acidity through specialized processing. Blonde chocolate deepens white chocolate through controlled browning. Modica chocolate protects an old crystalline texture. Single origin bars make geography part of the flavor. Gianduja blends chocolate with hazelnuts born from regional necessity. Raw chocolate reduces heat to create a less roasted expression. Drinking chocolate preserves the ancient idea that cacao can be experienced from a cup rather than a wrapper. Every style is shaped by a different combination of history, science, trade, agriculture, and taste. A shortage can create a new recipe. An overheated batch can become a new category. A refining machine can redefine smoothness. A regional bean can turn chocolate into an expression of place. Even the decision not to roast, not to refine, or not to form a bar can produce an entirely different result. The next time a piece of chocolate melts, its flavor may seem immediate, but its identity has been built through many choices made long before that moment. The tree, the harvest, the fermentation, the roast, the ingredients, the machinery, and the traditions of the maker all remain hidden inside the final bite. That is what makes chocolate so varied. One remarkable seed has been carried across cultures, and centuries continually reinvented without ever losing the cacao at its center.